In August 1897, a 37-year-old Viennese journalist named Theodor Herzl stepped off a coal-fueled train in Basel, Switzerland. His heart was failing. Every day he suffered from brutal palpitations and draining fatigue. Yet he had come to this city to attempt an entirely improbable logistical feat. He was going to try to speak a nation into existence out of thin air. For nearly 2,000 years following their exile by the Roman Empire, the Jewish connection to the land of Israel was maintained primarily through prayer. It was a spiritual longing, defined by a theological promise that a physical return would only happen when the Messiah finally arrived. They waited, fasting on holy days and ending their Passover meals with a vow of next year in Jerusalem. By the 19th century, the European Enlightenment offered a completely different kind of promise. The newly liberal societies of Europe offered equality and citizenship, pulling Jewish communities from isolated ghettos into the center of secular society. But this political emancipation contained a hidden, devastating trap. Historically, prejudice against Jews was rooted in religion. As brutal as that was, it offered a physical escape hatch, conversion to Christianity. But in the 19th century, that hatred mutated into a concept called anti-Semitism, a term coined to frame the prejudice as a matter of biology. Hatred was no longer about faith. It was classified as a permanent trait of race. A person can change their religion, but they cannot change their race. The escape hatch was permanently sealed shut. The promise of assimilation had failed, leaving millions of European Jews locked in an increasingly hostile continent without a safe physical refuge of their own. Theodor Herzl was perhaps the least likely person to try and build that refuge. He was not a rabbi or a religious scholar. He was a highly assimilated, secular writer who kept a Christmas tree in his home, wrote light comedies for the theater, and spent his evenings listening to Wagnerian operas. He identified entirely with German culture. His perspective fractured when he began reading modern, intellectualized anti-Semitism, specifically the work of Eugene Düring. Düring argued that Jews possessed a single, immutable character type and were effectively a parasitic race that could never be absorbed into European host nations. Herzl recognized the danger immediately because the book was so well written and aimed squarely at the educated elite. Then, working as a Paris correspondent in 1894, Herzl covered the treason trial of Captain Alfred Dreyfus. Dreyfus was a loyal, highly assimilated French artillery officer, falsely convicted of passing military secrets to Germany. As Dreyfus was stripped of his rank in a public courtyard, Herzl stood with the press corps, listening to the mob scream, "Death to the Jews." Watching a decorated officer degraded solely because of his ancestry provided the final proof. Europe would never accept them. Herzl concluded that waiting for tolerance, or waiting for divine intervention, was fatal. The Jewish people had to actively emancipate themselves by securing their own independent political state. Herzl poured this realization into a pamphlet titled Der Judenstaat, or The Jews' State. He deliberately wrote it in stiff, legalistic prose. He outlined a strictly pragmatic blueprint for mass emigration, land purchase, and international diplomacy, completely bypassing the traditional reliance on religious messianism. To finance this massive logistical undertaking, Herzl first approached established, extremely wealthy Jewish philanthropists. He presented his plan to Edmund de Rothschild, who already funded several dozen small agricultural communities in the region. Rothschild flatly rejected the proposal, viewing Herzl's push for sovereign political power as a dangerous fanaticism that would provoke charges of treason against European Jews. Locked out of the drawing rooms of the elite and feeling his own heart condition worsen over the month, Herzl changed his strategy. If the wealthy wouldn't buy a state, he would build a political machine to organize the millions of ordinary, working-class Jews who desperately needed one. He decided to convene a massive public congress. By turning away from aristocratic charity and forcing the conversation into the public sphere, Herzl took the ancient spiritual dream of a Jewish homeland and placed it directly into the hands of the people. Herzl designed the Basel Congress to function as an actual government in exile, projecting a level of political legitimacy that world powers could not ignore. He was obsessive about the optics, recognizing that the movement's survival depended on its presentation. When he arrived in Basel and discovered the local committee had rented a recently vacated tailor shop for their headquarters, he immediately canceled the lease. He needed the space to look like a true national assembly, so he secured the Musiksaal, the grand concert hall inside the Basel Municipal Casino. He then began inventing the necessary symbols of nationhood from scratch. Over the grand portals of the casino, he ordered a large white signboard hung, and right next to it, he mandated a flag of his own design, a white field with 2 blue stripes and a Star of David in the center. Herzl demanded attendees wear formal dress and enforced strict parliamentary rules. Long before securing sovereign territory or drafting a legal constitution, he had successfully manufactured the physical optics and the procedural machinery of a modern state. The 3-day Congress was an organizational triumph. It officially established the World Zionist Organization, adopted a defined political program, and created the financial instruments required to purchase land. After 2,000 years on the margins, the Jewish people had formally re-entered active political history. But this desperate race to save European Jewry contained a massive historical complication. In their urgent focus on escaping persecution, early political Zionists largely overlooked the people already living in the territory. This chart shows the estimated demographics of the region in the 1890s. While there were about 43,000 Jewish residents living there was a vastly larger indigenous population of roughly 500,000 Muslim and Christian Arabs. The Zionists possessed an incredibly compelling moral narrative for survival, driven by an immediate and lethal threat in Europe. Yet the local fellahin, the Arab farmers, had lived on and worked that land for centuries. As Jewish immigration increased, it inevitably collided with the developing national aspirations of the Palestinian Arabs. Herzl's systematic engineering of political legitimacy in Basel mobilized his people and laid the logistical blueprint for the modern state of Israel. But in solving one of history's oldest persecutions, the movement locked into place a bitter geopolitical conflict that the world still wrestles with today.